Listen closely. Can you hear the creak of old wood, the whisper of the Atlantic wind cutting across the coastline? That sound is the breath of a house, not just any house, but a monument built on a promise and a secret. In the year 1823, in the unforgiving, newly settled stretch of the American South, a brilliant mind was fighting a battle no one else knew about. Her name was Lucy Davenport. She didn't just design homes, she designed destinies. And when she set out to create the grandest structure the young nation had ever seen, the Pierce Manor, she poured every ounce of her genius, her obsession, and her fatal secret into its foundation. But what happens when the very blueprint meant to immortalize you becomes the map to your own destruction? The house is ready. The architect, however, is running out of time. The air in Charleston, South Carolina, in the spring of 1823, hung thick and heavy, smelling of salt marsh and new timber. For Lucy Davenport, the weight of the climate was nothing compared to the crushing weight of her secret. She stood on the high, clay bluff overlooking the tidal river, her linen dress whipping around her ankles, not watching the sluggish current, but tracing the invisible lines of her most audacious creation, Cedarcroft. Her personal secret, the slow, cold fire in her lungs, felt strangely linked to the shadowy command of the house. She was fighting a battle on two fronts, one against her dwindling time and one against the ill-defined secrets of her client. Lucy was an anomaly in this era, a woman with a surveyor's eye and an engineer's mind. She had trained in Philadelphia and returned south not to keep house, but to build it. At 32, her reputation was built on elegant efficiency, but Cedarcroft was something else entirely. It was a Gothic revival behemoth, a stark challenge to the prevailing Georgian symmetry, commissioned by the enigmatic Gideon Pierce. Pierce, a man whose fortune was as vast and shadowy as the cypress swamps he owned, had given her only two mandates. The house must stand for 1,000 years, and it must hide an entire wing dedicated to his private studies, inaccessible save for a single, non-standard key. The money was infinite, the pressure crippling. She accepted the infinite money, but the chilling realization that her genius would serve a secret, not an ideal, was the true cost of the commission. Lucy's current battle was with the sheer logistics. Her health, a matter she discussed only with the tincture bottle hidden in her desk, was fading like old ink. The persistent, racking cough she dismissed as a common fever was a constant, unwelcome companion. It meant she had to work 3 times as fast and trust only one man entirely, Amos Fletcher. Amos, her chief foreman and draftsman, was a man of quiet competence, his hands scarred from years of handling rough lumber. He found her now, his face smudged with plaster dust, holding a rolled drawing. "Ms. Davenport," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "The north foundation trench is ready, but the local stone is cracking the saws faster than we can replace them. It's too soft for the bearing walls. We need granite, and that shipment from upriver is delayed by the rains." Lucy took the drawing, her thumb tracing the complex intersection of load-bearing walls. "Then we don't wait for the granite, Amos. We change the formula. Dig a deeper footing, 6 feet instead of 4, and use the coquina. But mix in an aggregate of oyster shell, ground fine. It's what the Spanish used down in St. Augustine. It will set harder than any granite, and it's right beneath our feet." Amos blinked, momentarily stunned. "Oyster shell? They'll laugh you out of the city planning office." "Let them laugh," Lucy retorted, her eyes flashing with a familiar fire. "They want a house that lasts. They will get a house that endures. Now, send a runner to the wharf. I need to see the latest shipment of European glass for the conservatory." She dismissed the idea of ridicule with the wave of a slender, but determined, hand. The only approval Lucy needed was the silence of a perfect structure and the tick of her own dwindling clock. But Amos paused, not moving. "Ms. Davenport, you look pale. Are you certain you shouldn't rest a while? The overseer can manage the foundation mix." Lucy forced a smile, a brittle, practiced expression. "I'll rest when Cedarcroft is complete, Amos." A true architect knows her materials, even the ones in her own body. She turned away quickly before the tremor in her hand, betraying her exhaustion, could be seen. She had to ensure the foundation was set before she had to reveal her true, hidden blueprint, the one that Amos alone would need to complete. Henry Caldwell was the architecture establishment in Charleston. A man of 50, impeccably dressed in dark wool, he viewed Lucy Davenport's rise with the sour resentment of a master passed over by a student with a wilder imagination. Caldwell represented the old guard, order, tradition, and a stubborn refusal to adapt to new materials or structural theories. He saw Cedarcroft as an act of architectural heresy, a dangerous, towering folly that would inevitably collapse and soil the reputation of the entire profession. He arrived on horseback, not bothering to dismount fully, preferring to loom over the sprawling worksite like a carrion bird. He found Lucy not near the bustle of the lumberyard, but in the quiet, rough-hewn temporary office, poring over a new set of drawings. Davenport, Caldwell's voice was a low, cutting rasp. I hear you're mixing crustacean shells into your footings. Are we building a mansion or a middens heap? Lucy did not flinch, nor did she stand. She calmly continued to mark a precise line on a drawing of the ventilation shafts. Mr. Caldwell, a structure's strength lies in its ability to resist the soil it rests upon. The local coquina rock, mixed with powdered oyster shell, provides the necessary silica and compressive strength. The Roman Pantheon's dome uses volcanic ash and lime. I use what the earth provides. Caldwell snorted, dismounting and letting his heavy boots thump onto the dirt floor. The Pantheon was built 2,000 years ago. We are here. And your design, it defies physics, girl. That central gallery is 120 feet long with only 2 points of support. You're asking for catastrophic shear stress. He tapped a point on the drawing where a long, sweeping window line began. And this grand, recessed conservatory? It pulls the entire north wing outward, off-center. When the first hurricane hits, Cedarcroft will not endure. It will split. Lucy finally looked up, her expression calm, but her eyes holding a deep, weary fire. It will not split, Mr. Caldwell, because it is designed to move. She pushed a different blueprint across the table, the standard, public-facing elevation. I've employed a system of internal countertension girders, anchored to the bedrock in a triple helix pattern. It's a design based on the skeletal structure of certain deep-sea fish, flexible in the middle, anchored at the ends. Caldwell scoffed, but his eyes were glued to the drawing. He was a master, and he recognized the complexity. A fish? You build a house based on a fish? This is madness, not architecture. And the cost? Does Mr. Pierce know how many structural secrets you've built into his walls just to make this ridiculous spectacle stand? Mr. Pierce knows that an immortal structure requires immortal ingenuity, Lucy stated simply. And the cost is his concern, not yours. Your concern, Mr. Caldwell, is why you are truly here. Is it to criticize my materials or to discover the secret of the ventilation shafts, which you've been struggling with on the new City Hall plans for 6 months? Caldwell went silent, his face reddening. He was indeed stumped by the airflow dynamics of a large public building. Lucy had just exposed his envy. Good day, Mr. Caldwell, she said, gathering her papers. I have a house to finish. You have a reputation to salvage. She left him standing alone, his shadow long in the dusty light. A defeated man who now knew Lucy Davenport was not merely talented. She was brilliant and dangerously close to proving him utterly obsolete. His anger, however, was now compounded by a burning, professional suspicion. He vowed to find the flaw in her fish house before it was too late. The arrival of Gideon Pierce was always a spectacle of quiet, immense power. He didn't ride a carriage. He was rowed upriver in a sleek, silent longboat, emerging from the early morning mist like a figure carved from the landscape itself. Pierce was not a loud man, but his presence was a heavy, intoxicating scent of tobacco and money. Lucy met him on the grounds, where the skeleton of the main house was beginning to rise. He was tall, his coat of black velvet suggesting a wealth beyond mere cotton or indigo. His eyes, the color of wet slate, swept over the chaos of construction with an unsettling calm, fixing not on the men, but on the evolving geometry. The structure breathes, Architect Davenport, Pierce observed, his voice soft, almost a lullaby. I can feel the intention in the rising walls. It's sound, Mr. Pierce, Lucy confirmed, pulling herself straight and masking the sudden fatigue the early morning chill brought on. We are on schedule to frame the roof trusses by the end of the month, provided the ironwork arrives from Savannah. Pierce nodded, then gestured toward the far wing, the one entirely shielded from the main house. My private studies. The heart of the testament, as I call it. Show me the entrance. Lucy led him to a small, unassuming door tucked beneath a service porch. It was the only way into the massive, two-story wing. The construction team has been told this is for storage. Only Amos and I know the true purpose. The locks will be fitted next week. They are a custom design, with a dual tumbler, activated only by this. She presented the non-standard, ornate silver key he had provided months ago. Excellent, Pierce murmured, taking the key and turning it over in his hand. A key, architect, is a far more powerful object than a simple door. A key promises entry, but it also enforces privacy. Inside this wing, I will house my entire collection of historical documents, my testament to the future of the Republic. It is a fragile collection. The air must be stable. No damp. No excessive light. He didn't need to specify. Lucy had designed the wing with a passive environmental control system that was decades ahead of its time. Thick stone walls, a false roof cavity for temperature stabilization, and light-filtering panes of imported ruby glass. I have also ensured, Lucy added, her voice dropping, that the two interior pillars, though visually identical to the others, are hollow. They are conduits, Mr. Pierce, that run from the floor to the sub-basement. No one but you and I know this. Pierce turned to her, his slate eyes suddenly piercing. You have exceeded my expectations, architect. This secrecy is valuable. He gave her a slight, unnerving smile. But is your health, as they whisper, up to the task? Caldwell implies you are pushing yourself toward collapse. I need this house finished, Davenport, not an artistic martyrdom. The directness of the question struck Lucy like a physical blow. She realized Pierce saw her not as a human, but as a mechanism necessary for the construction. Mr. Pierce, she replied, her voice steady with sheer willpower. My dedication to Cedarcroft is absolute. The plans are complete, every structural detail accounted for. If I were to vanish tomorrow, my foreman Amos Fletcher could complete the work to the letter. This was a half-truth, a critical lie meant to buy her the final weeks she desperately needed. Pierce seemed satisfied. Good. I shall hold you to that, architect. But pray, do not vanish. I require your specific genius for the final details. The house is a machine, and you are its clockmaker. He dismissed her with a wave and walked toward the river, leaving Lucy with the profound, chilling realization that she wasn't just building a house for Pierce. She was building a crypt for her own secrets, one piece of cut stone at a time. In the small, rented cottage Lucy called home, the gaslight hissed, throwing long, distorted shadows of her work. This was where the real blueprint existed, not on standard paper, but on a series of wax-sealed vellum scrolls hidden in a false bottom of an old sea chest. Amos Fletcher arrived late, carrying a jar of imported ink Lucy had requested. He found her hunched over a drawing that seemed to defy the conventions of the time. It was a complex series of geometric calculations using logarithmic spirals and the golden ratio, applied not to the visual design, but to the structural load dynamics. Miss Davenport, you still working? It's past midnight, Amos said, setting the ink down softly. The men are talking. They say you don't sleep. Lucy sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. She didn't sleep because the cough was worse, and the pain in her ribs had become a constant, dull throb. Sleep is for those who have finished their work, Amos. I'm close. Closer than I've ever been to the perfect equation. She pointed to a line of numbers on the vellum. These are not just building specifications. They are a corrective mechanism. Caldwell's fears are not baseless. The central gallery will stress the bearing walls. My solution isn't to overbuild, but to counterbalance. She explained, talking quickly, passionately, trying to pour 6 months of complex theory into a few minutes of instruction. The stone for the East Tower is dense, heavy, and cold. The stone for the West Tower, where the conservatory is lighter, warmer, and prone to expansion. This difference, this inherent imbalance, is my secret. If the entire structure were perfectly symmetrical, the different stones, expanding and contracting at different rates with the seasonal change, would tear the house apart. Amos leaned in, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a brilliant artisan, but this was pure, theoretical engineering. So what is the answer? he asked. The attic truss, Lucy whispered, tapping a point on the scroll. The largest, highest, most inconspicuous part of the house. I've designed a specialized truss system, using oak instead of pine and anchored to the outer walls, not the inner structure. It's a tension and compression system. It works against the natural movement of the stone, constantly pulling the west wall in and letting the east wall out, a millimeter at a time, every season. She handed Amos a thick, leather-bound notebook. This book contains the exact calculations for the final tension settings. The main prints only show a standard truss. When the roof is fully laid, the construction foreman will install the truss with standard bolts, as dictated by the public prints. But after the roofers are gone, Amos, you must go in alone. You must swap out the standard iron bolts for these. She opened the sea chest and pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. Inside were 24 gleaming, specially forged brass bolts, each inscribed with a tiny, almost invisible Roman numeral. These brass bolts are of a specific length and thread count. They connect to a hidden turnbuckle inside the oak beam. Following the numbers in that book, the tension book, you must turn each turnbuckle exactly the number of rotations specified. One error, one forgotten turn, and the system fails. The house will break its own back in the first 5 years. Amos stared at the bolts, then at the pale, exhausted face of his architect. The secret was monumental. It wasn't just a structural detail. It was a testament to Lucy's complete distrust of the world knowing her genius. "Why not just put it on the main plans, Ms. Davenport?" he asked, his voice thick with a mix of awe and fear. Lucy closed her eyes, leaning back against the rough wall. "Because, Amos, this is the part of the design Henry Caldwell can't allow to succeed. The world is not ready for a house that is designed to move. This is my legacy. And you, my friend, are the only one I trust to finish it when I cannot." The unspoken was now clear. Lucy was preparing him for her death. The next morning, the air at Cedarcroft was charged with more than just construction dust. Nathaniel Brooks, a federal inspector from the new Bureau of Public Works, arrived unannounced. Brooks was a dour, professional man in a stiff, uncomfortable suit, sent down from Washington at the insistence of, as everyone quickly surmised, Henry Caldwell. Brooks carried a ledger and a keen, investigative eye. He moved slowly, deliberately, measuring, tapping, and questioning every worker on the site. His focus was clear: the foundation and the structural beams. He was looking for a breach in the building code, an instability that would justify a city-mandated halt to the construction. Lucy met him at the main entrance, her manner cool and cooperative. "Mr. Brooks, all our plans were filed and approved by the City Council 3 months ago. You are free to inspect any part of the site, provided you do not interfere with the ongoing work." Brooks ignored the pleasantry. "I have heard whispers, Architect Davenport, that you are using unorthodox materials. The stability of a building of this magnitude is a federal concern. Show me the load-bearing calculations for the Western Foundation." Lucy presented him with the official, sanitized calculations. He spent an hour poring over them, his pencil scratching on a notepad. He found nothing technically incorrect, though the numbers were revolutionary. "The stress load distribution is radically low for the building's projected mass," Brooks finally declared, folding the papers. "It appears sound on paper, but I've learned to trust my instincts. This design feels volatile." "It is dynamically balanced, Mr. Brooks, not volatile," Lucy corrected, refusing to let him intimidate her. "The structural core of the house is designed to carry the majority of the sheer weight. The walls are merely elegant curtain supports." As they moved toward the lumberyard, a sudden commotion erupted near the partially erected roof frame. Amos Fletcher was wrestling with a thick, iron chain, trying to hoist the first of the oak trusses for the attic. "What is that oak doing up there?" Brooks immediately demanded, pointing. "The main plans call for native pine truss work. Oak is heavier, and that beam looks to be 30 feet long. You're altering the materials without an amendment." Lucy inwardly cursed. She had forgotten to update the material list on the public plans. "The oak is a reinforcement," she quickly explained. "A last-minute decision to ensure the greatest possible longevity. The difference in mass is negligible when spread across the roofline." Brooks, however, saw his opportunity. He walked over to the stack of fresh oak, his nose wrinkling. He bent down and picked up a piece of timber that was clearly meant for the truss. He ran his hand across the end and then smelled his palm. "What is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "I smell oil. Not pine sap, but a machined oil. And a fine thread has been bored into this wood. Are these beams hollowed out?" Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs. Brooks had stumbled onto the hidden access points for the turnbuckle bolts, the very secret she had confided to Amos. The threaded holes were supposed to be plugged and puttied before the inspector's arrival. "That's impossible, Mr. Brooks," Lucy lied, her face perfectly composed. The timber was treated with a protective linseed oil before shipment to prevent rot. As for the threads, it must be the mark of a misplaced jig from the mill. "We will plane the wood clean before assembly." Brooks did not look convinced. He gave the beam a final, suspicious glance. The scent of machine oil on the wood, the unusual heft of the oak, and the clear scent of a major deception hung heavy in the air. He made a meticulous note in his ledger, his eyes fixed on Lucy. "I will be requesting a full, forensic audit of all materials and an inspection of Mr. Pierce's private wing before any occupancy permit is granted, Architect Davenport," he announced, turning to leave. "Cedarcroft may stand 1,000 years, but it must be built within the laws of this republic. I have a growing suspicion that you have two separate blueprints, one for the city and one for your own dangerous ambition." Lucy watched him ride away, the chilling realization settling over her. The secret was out in the open. Now, she had to rely on Amos to finish the attic before Brooks's inevitable return. The inspection by Nathaniel Brooks and the discovery of the threaded oak shattered the last illusion of safety. Lucy knew she had only a matter of days before Brooks could return with a court order to halt construction and tear open the timber to expose her final mechanism. That evening, Lucy had a fever that burned like tinder, and the cough had worsened to a spasm that left her weak and breathless. She summoned Amos Fletcher to her cottage. She was propped up on her bed, covered in blankets despite the heat, the leather-bound tension book and the box of brass bolts resting on her chest. Her face was gray, but her eyes held a fierce, unnatural intensity. "Amos," she began, her voice a reedy whisper, "we have run out of time. Brooks is not a fool. He is a tool of Caldwell, and he is coming back to expose the truss. If he finds the hollowed wood and the turnbuckle system, the entire project will be condemned, not just for building code violations, but for fraud. Cedarcroft will never be finished." Amos knelt beside the bed, his strong hands taking the book and the box. He didn't ask about her health. He knew there was no time for that now. "What is the schedule, Ms. Davenport?" he asked, his voice steady. "The roofers start tomorrow, before sunup," she explained, taking a shallow breath. "They will lay the ridge beam and the sheathing in 2 days. The moment they are off the roof, you must go up. You must drill the bolt holes, insert the brass bolts, and set the tension. Immediately." She opened the notebook to the first page, marked Sequence Alpha. "The book is your Bible. It contains the exact number of half-turns for each of the 24 bolts. The numbers are based on the calculated weight of the stone, the tensile strength of the oak, and the projected wind load. Do not deviate by a single half-turn, Amos. The margin of error is less than 1/8 of an inch." She looked directly into his eyes, her own burning with fever and absolute trust. "This is not just a building, Amos. It is a philosophy. I am proving that asymmetry is the true path to endurance. If you set the tension incorrectly, the entire structure will collapse inwards. It will be a magnificent, architectural suicide." "But, Ms. Davenport," Amos protested, his voice low with genuine terror. "I'm a foreman, a draftsman. I'm not an engineer. If I make a mistake—" "You will not." Lucy cut him off, her hand resting over his. "You have the sight, Amos. You have the feel for the wood and the stone that I only have for the mathematics. You are the only one who has understood the intention of Cedarcroft. The house is a heart, and you must set the rhythm of its beat." She made him repeat the oath. "I will follow the tension book exactly. I will install the bolts and set the sequence before the inspector returns. I will complete Cedarcroft." Amos looked down at the brass bolts, gleaming like 24 pieces of a deadly, beautiful puzzle. He knew this was the promise of a lifetime, a promise he could never break, even if it meant risking his own life and reputation. "I swear it, Ms. Davenport," he whispered, standing. "I will complete your testament." But you must hold on. I need you to see the roof finished." Lucy simply smiled, a weak, heartbreaking expression of relief. She had transferred her burden, her secret, and her masterpiece into the hands of the one man she trusted absolutely. The only thing left to transfer was the key to the private wing, the final piece of the puzzle that was connected to the hollow pillars she had shown Gideon Pierce. But that key, and the secret it held, had to wait. The ironwork shipment from Savannah finally arrived, not by river, but by road, pulled by a team of exhausted oxen. The main cargo was the decorative wrought iron for the balconies and the conservatory glass supports. But tucked away beneath a canvas tarp in the final wagon was a small, heavy, unmarked crate. Gideon Pierce was the only one who met the wagon. He dismissed the teamsters and personally oversaw the unloading of the single crate, insisting that it be carried immediately into the locked private studies wing, the one whose entrance was hidden beneath the service porch. He encountered Lucy Davenport near the wing, who, despite her illness, had dragged herself out of her sickbed to supervise the mounting of the largest window pane in the main gallery. She was drawn by a strange, magnetic pull toward the private wing, knowing that something was about to happen that she needed to witness. "Mr. Pierce," she greeted him, leaning heavily against a post. "Is that the final shipment for the interior? I hope the library shelves are included. The wood needs to acclimatize." Pierce stopped, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps annoyance, perhaps concern, crossing his features. "Architect Davenport, I thought you were confined to your bed. You look like a ghost." "I am merely ensuring the glass is set properly," Lucy replied, her eyes fixed on the sturdy, unmarked crate being carried past them. "I designed this house to be finished by my hand." "What is in the box, Mr. Pierce?" "It is quite heavy for decorative items." Pierce watched the crate disappear behind the locked door. "It is a geological collection. Rare stones I have collected from my travels. They are the final touch, architect. They will sit in the hollow pillars you so cleverly designed in the center of the study's wing." Lucy felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She hadn't designed the hollow pillars for a collection of rocks. She had designed them as structural access points, conduits for a final, crucial detail related to the building's drainage and stress sensors. She had never told Pierce that. She had only told him they were hollow. "A geological collection," Lucy repeated, her mind racing. "Sir, I must insist that the sub-basement beneath that wing be properly ventilated before any heavy collection is stored above. I can check the airflow this afternoon." "Unnecessary," Pierce said, his voice now flat and final. "The study's wing is sealed and finished. Your access to it is now restricted to the single key, which only I possess. Do not trouble yourself with my collection, architect. Focus on the roof. I am told your assistant is preparing for a particularly delicate installation." The subtle threat was clear. Pierce knew about the truss. He knew Amos was preparing for the secret setting, and he was deliberately locking her out of the only part of the house where her design had a second, hidden structural purpose. "Very well, Mr. Pierce," Lucy said, forcing a nod. "But if you notice any unusual settling in that wing, you must call me immediately." "I will," Pierce assured her, but his eyes were distant, fixed on the closed door. He then turned and disappeared inside, locking the door with the ornate key and leaving Lucy with the profound, chilling realization that she wasn't just building a house for Pierce, she was building a crypt for her own secrets, one piece of cut stone at a time. The attic space was a stifling oven, trapping the fierce midday sun between the slate shingles and the massive oak trusses. The final roofing crew had packed up and left a little after 10 a.m., satisfied with a job well done. Now, the space belonged entirely to Amos Fletcher. He climbed the 3 flights of ladder, the leather tension book strapped to his wrist, the box of brass bolts clanking heavily against his hip. The smell of fresh oak, tar, and hot dust was overwhelming. The attic truss was a masterpiece of hidden engineering. The 30-foot main ridge beam, made of the heavier oak, was now fastened to the lateral walls with large, standard iron bolts. To the untrained eye, the job was complete and sound. Amos pulled out the oil lantern and the necessary tools, a finely tooled auger, a ratchet wrench, and a small, delicate brass level. He began by prying off the small, wooden plugs Lucy had insisted on placing over the threaded access points. The plugs were meant to conceal the secret from Henry Caldwell and Brooks. but they were now merely delays. He started at the eastern end, near the great stone chimney. The tension book lay open to sequence alpha. Bolt number I. He carefully drilled out the center of the temporary iron bolt, removed it, and inserted the gleaming brass bolt I, the unique thread catching perfectly in the bored-out oak. The bolt head fit into a small, inset depression in the wood. The critical phase began. The book specified, bolt I 7.5 full turns. Stop at the half turn, counter compression. Amos placed the wrench over the bolt and began to turn, his muscles protesting against the weight of the massive beam and the resistance of the hidden turnbuckle deep inside the oak. 1, 2, 3. With each turn, he felt a minute, almost imperceptible shift in the massive roof structure. He was not tightening a bolt. He was tuning a machine. At the 4.5 turn mark, he paused. A strange, resonant hum began to emanate from the oak. It wasn't the sound of straining wood. It was the sound of controlled, complex stress. He checked the brass level. The eastern end of the ridge had shifted exactly as the book predicted, a fraction of a degree toward the center, compensating for the denser stone. He continued the sequence, his fear giving way to an intense, almost devotional focus. 7, 7.5. Click. Perfect. He moved to bolt 2, then bolt 3, following the pattern. More turns on the east wing, the compression side, and fewer on the west, the tension side, all designed to create an invisible, constant pull and release mechanism in the heart of the house. By the time he reached bolt X, he was drenched in sweat, his arms aching, and the attic was alive with the deep, structural humming of the wood. This house was no longer a static building. It was a vast, geometric instrument playing a chord of perpetual motion. As he worked on bolt 13, he heard the faint, distant sound of a horse galloping toward the site. He glanced toward the small attic window. A rider, a dark figure on a large bay horse, was tearing up the drive. It was Nathaniel Brooks. Amos's blood ran cold. He had only completed half the sequence. He was trapped in the attic, halfway through setting the critical balance. If Brooks caught him now, the exposed bolts in the tension book would be all the proof needed to condemn the entire structure and brand Lucy a fraud. He had to finish, and he had to do it before Brooks could summon the manpower to breach the heavy attic door. Nathaniel Brooks wasted no time. He had returned with a full court order to halt construction and to dismantle the entire roof truss for a forensic investigation. He was accompanied by 2 city marshals and, conspicuously, Henry Caldwell, who stood at the bottom of the main staircase, a look of vindicated triumph on his face. "Halt all work," Brooks bellowed to the startled laborers. "By order of the city, this structure is deemed unsafe and is under immediate review." He marched straight for Lucy's temporary office, finding it empty. He then turned to the main staircase, pointing toward the high ceiling where the ominous, deep hum of the attic was now discernible, though faint. "The roof. The sound is coming from the roof. Caldwell, you were right. They've rigged something up there." Caldwell smirked. "I knew that woman's ego would be her undoing. She has concealed an illegal stress mechanism. Tear it down, Brooks. Expose the fraud." Up in the sweltering attic, Amos was working on bolt 16. The pounding of his own heart was drowning out the structural hum. He could hear the shouts of Brooks and the heavy boots of the marshals on the main staircase below, closer now, echoing in the vast, hollow space. He needed 8 more bolts, and each one required precise, agonizing labor. He skipped the meticulous cleaning and oiling, sacrificing neatness for speed. Bolt 17, 9.5 full turns. Compression offset. Amos threw all his weight into the wrench. His knuckles were raw, and his arms felt like lead, but the memory of Lucy's pale, feverish face, the absolute trust in her eyes, drove him on. He was working not just for his employer, but for her final resting place, her legacy. The marshals reached the heavy, bolted door at the attic entrance. "Open up in there," one of them yelled, pounding the wood. "We know you're up there, Fletcher. Open, or we'll breach the door." Amos ignored them, focusing on the numbers. He was on bolt XX. He heard the terrible crack of wood as the marshals began to splinter the door frame with a heavy iron bar. He had minutes, perhaps seconds. He didn't need to see the book for the last 4 bolts. The numbers were burned into his mind. He worked by feel now, listening to the pitch of the wood's hum, knowing exactly when the necessary tension was achieved. The house felt like a live thing resisting him, then yielding to his will. Bolt Ziv, 6.0 full turns. Final counterbalance. The door groaned and splintered below. Amos shoved the tension book, the wrench, and the box of unused bolts into a bag. He gave the final turn, feeling the entire massive roof structure settle with a deep, satisfying thrum. The final, perfect chord of the architectural symphony. He scrambled to the small attic window, pushing it open with a shoulder. He looked down. It was a 3-story drop onto the muddy, dangerous ground. The sound of the door finally giving way, of the marshals pouring into the attic, spurred him to action. He threw his bag out the window, then swung his legs over the sill, trusting his years of carpentry skill and sheer desperation to save him. He landed hard in the soft, muddy flower bed below, the wind knocked out of him. He staggered to his feet, clutching his side, and ran, disappearing into the dense cover of the salt marsh, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the deep, quiet hum of the perfectly tuned house he had just saved. The marshals found the empty attic, the splintered door, and the fresh marks of the bolt sequence, but Amos was gone. They did, however, find one item of interest, a small, crimson-stained handkerchief bearing the monogram LD. Meanwhile, Henry Caldwell, still raging from Amos's escape, was determined to prove the entire structure was a sham. The marshals had confirmed the attic truss was set, but Caldwell insisted the foundation must have cracked under the weight. "The whole thing is a lie, Brooks," Caldwell shrieked. "She only fixed the top. I predicted the failure point in the west wall. The tensile strain is too high. It has to be cracked." Ignoring the marshals, Caldwell grabbed a heavy sledgehammer from a discarded tool pile and swung it with desperate fury against the finished stone of the western load-bearing wall, the section he had ridiculed earlier for being too weak. He struck it 3 times, the heavy thud echoing through the vast, empty gallery. When the plaster shattered and fell away, revealing the core of the wall, there was no catastrophic crack. There was only a solid, perfectly bonded mass of stone and mortar. Caldwell leaned closer, his eyes wide in disbelief. He saw the tiny, white flecks of powdered oyster shell mixed throughout the coquina, setting the wall with impossible strength. Lucy's ridiculed, middens heap material had set harder than granite, precisely where he had predicted a structural failure. His final, professional challenge had been met with a silent, immovable rebuttal. He dropped the hammer, defeated. Brooks, watching the scene, used the sound of the sledgehammer as a signal for his final confrontation with Lucy. He found her standing by the window of her cottage, surprisingly calm, her fever seeming to have broken, replaced by a strange, unnerving serenity. The cottage was spotless, her books packed, and a single, sealed letter lay on her desk. "Architect Davenport," Brooks announced, his voice stiff. "Your foreman has fled the site after committing a felony, structural sabotage. The roof truss has been illegally modified. I am issuing a final order to halt construction and tear down the roof." Lucy turned to face him, her eyes clear. "You will do no such thing, Mr. Brooks. The roof truss is not sabotage. It is the final act of structural genius. The house is complete." She walked to the desk, ignoring the effort it took, and picked up the sealed letter. "Mr. Brooks, I designed Cedarcroft to be in a state of perpetual, balanced tension. If you remove those bolts, the different density of the stone will cause a catastrophic structural failure within 5 years. The house will crack and collapse. You cannot prove a design flaw unless you destroy the house." She handed him the letter. "This is my confession. It states that I, and I alone, conceived of and executed the concealed truss mechanism. Amos Fletcher merely acted under my direct instruction. He is an artisan, not a criminal. He has fled because he fears your persecution, not because he is guilty." Brooks hesitated, looking at the letter, then at the exhausted woman. He knew she was telling the truth about the design. It was too complex to be a lie, and the sudden, uncanny silence of the house confirmed it was now, somehow, sound. But the fraud was undeniable. "You have broken the building code, Davenport. You have defrauded the city," Brooks said, his professional indignation at war with a strange, grudging respect. Lucy smiled faintly, a ghost of her old, fiery self. "In my profession, Mr. Brooks, a law is merely a boundary set by an inferior imagination. I built a monument. They build barracks. There is a difference. Now, I have one final matter to attend to. She reached beneath her coat and pulled out a small, ornate silver key, Gideon Pierce's private studies key, the non-standard one. This key is to the wing where Mr. Pierce stores his geological collection. The construction is sound, but the contents are not as advertised. I believe there is something hidden in the hollow pillars I designed, something heavy, valuable, and potentially harmful. Something that could, if dislodged, be the only true threat to the foundation of Cedarcroft. She laid the key on the table next to the confession. I give you the house, Mr. Brooks. It is sound, but you must investigate the hollow pillars. I did not design Cedarcroft for a crime, and I will not allow it to house one. Brooks stared at the key. The architect had not only confessed, but had given him the one tool he needed to complete his investigation. He had come to condemn a building, and was leaving with a structural masterpiece, a confession, and the key to a second, deeper mystery. Henry Caldwell was apoplectic. The city marshals confirmed that the roof was now perfectly stable and that Lucy Davenport had not only confessed, but had thrown suspicion onto Gideon Pierce's private studies. His public failure to find a flaw, both in the roof and in the foundation, had broken him. Caldwell found Brooks arguing with the city attorney. You cannot possibly accept that confession. She is ill, delirious. She needs to be arrested, and that monstrosity needs to be torn down. I told you it was a fraud. The structure is sound, Caldwell, Brooks said, his voice quiet but firm. The stress readings are now within an acceptable margin. The woman is either mad or a genius, but the house stands. And her confession is real. Nonsense, Caldwell roared. It's a trick. She's hiding the plans. The real plans that will show the weakness. She has a hidden blueprint. I know it. His desperation drove him to the empty site. He spent hours, like a frantic vulture, searching Lucy's abandoned office, tearing up floorboards, smashing plaster. He found nothing. He then turned his focus to the weakest link, the missing foreman. Caldwell knew Amos Fletcher's family lived in a small tenant cottage mile outside the city limits. He rode hard and fast, fueled by professional jealousy and a lifetime of being second best. He found Amos at dusk, dirty and exhausted, hiding in a small, damp shed behind his family's cottage. Fletcher, you fool, Caldwell hissed, grabbing the young man by the collar. Davenport has confessed. She's given you up, and she's given Brooks the key to Pierce's wing. You had her real blueprints. Where are they? The notes. The book. The one that details the true flaw. Amos, though worn out, was not easily intimidated. He stared at Caldwell with quiet contempt. There is no flaw, Mr. Caldwell. Only genius. And the only book I have is my own carpentry ledger. Liar, Caldwell screamed, shaking him. She told Brooks she used the brass bolts to correct an imbalance. Where's the book that tells you how many turns? She couldn't possibly have memorized it. Amos's mind went back to the tension book, buried deep in his bag, which was now hidden beneath the loose floorboards of the shed. He knew if Caldwell found it, the complex mathematical formula would be destroyed or used against Lucy's reputation forever. She had a good memory, Mr. Caldwell, Amos said, keeping his voice steady. She told me the turns. I followed her command. Caldwell punched him, a desperate, clumsy blow that glanced off Amos's cheek. You were her apprentice. You loved her. She's ruined you, and she's ruined me. Show me the plans, Fletcher. The world needs to know the truth of that structure. Amos simply stood his ground, guarding the spot where the bag was hidden. He knew Caldwell was wrong. The truth wasn't the plans. The truth was the house itself, standing solid and silent on the bluff. Caldwell eventually gave up, exhausted and raving, riding away with a final, chilling threat. The house will fall, Fletcher, and when it does, they'll hang you both. Amos waited until the sound of the horse faded. He pulled out the tension book, ran a gentle hand over the cover, and knew he had to keep moving. He was now the sole guardian of Lucy's legacy, and he couldn't let Caldwell or Brooks silence the perfect hum of Cedarcroft. His job wasn't finished until the house was fully accepted by the world. Armed with the ornate silver key and a formal search warrant, Nathaniel Brooks and the two city marshals approached Gideon Pierce's private studies wing. The house was unnervingly quiet, the entire site abandoned by the construction crew. Brooks inserted the non-standard key. It turned with a heavy, expensive click. They stepped inside. The wing was vast and dark, the only light filtering through the ruby-colored glass. It was clearly a magnificent library, lined with shelves designed to hold thousands of volumes. But the shelves were empty. The only objects were the two massive, decorative pillars in the center of the room. The ones Lucy had informed him were hollow. The marshals were ordered to tap the stone. The sound was a dull, hollow thud. "They're not just hollow, sir," one marshal observed. "They're plugged at the bottom. The core seems to run right into the foundation." Brooks, remembering Lucy's warning about a heavy, valuable, and potentially harmful collection, ordered the marshals to carefully dismantle the base of the nearest pillar. It was slow, laborious work. When the final piece of the plinth was removed, they found not an empty conduit, but a carefully placed stack of heavy, lead-lined wooden boxes, perfectly sized to fit the interior diameter of the pillar. The boxes were the contents of the geological collection. Brooks ordered them to hoist the first box out. It was shockingly heavy, requiring all 3 men to strain. He forced the lock. Inside were not rocks, but stacks of silver coins, American eagles and Spanish reals, tarnished by time and packed in muslin. The sheer volume was staggering. "Good heavens," the marshal whispered. "That's a king's ransom. Tax evasion." Brooks shook his head. "It's far too much for just evasion. Look at the volume. If the other pillar is the same, this is enough to destabilize the foundation." They moved to the second pillar and began the painstaking work of pulling out the remaining boxes. There were 6 in total, 3 in each pillar. All of them contained the same, old, valuable currency. But the final, deepest box in the second pillar was different. It was smaller, made of iron, and sealed with a heavy, archaic lock. When Brooks finally forced it open, he found not money, but a single, brittle, parchment scroll. Brooks carefully unrolled the scroll, his eyes widening as he read the title. "The Land Grant of 1778, Property of the Cherokee Nation." It was a legal document, notarized and ratified by the colonial government, explicitly reserving the entire Charleston Peninsula, including the bluff where Cedarcroft stood, for the Cherokee Nation. A land grant that had been quietly suppressed and ignored for 40 years to allow the expansion of the city and its plantations. Brooks looked at the towering, silent house. Lucy had known. Gideon Pierce hadn't just built a beautiful house to show off his wealth. He had built an impenetrable vault to hide the material evidence of a monumental crime. The theft of an entire peninsula, financed by the money he had stolen from the land itself. The geological collection was the life savings of the displaced people, and the final piece of evidence was the land grant itself. Lucy Davenport had designed the only house on the peninsula that was physically capable of hiding that much weight and that important a secret. She had built a structural masterpiece, but Pierce had intended it to be a vault of treason. Gideon Pierce was furious. He returned from a short trip to Savannah and found his private studies wing breached, the silver removed, and the sacred land grant of 1778 in the hands of Nathaniel Brooks. Pierce found Brooks at the empty Cedarcroft, standing in the vast, hollow main gallery, waiting. "Brooks, you have committed an unforgivable crime. That key was stolen. You've plundered my private property." Pierce roared, his smooth veneer finally cracked. "Your private property is the stolen wealth of the Cherokee Nation, Mr. Pierce," Brooks stated, holding up the brittle parchment. "And your house is a vault for treason." Architect Davenport confessed her own architectural deception and then exposed yours. "Did you intend to destroy the land grant once the house was finished and fully settled?" Pierce laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Destroy it? No, I intended to bury it. To secure it forever beneath a monument so impressive that no one would dare question the foundation it rested on." Davenport's design was perfect for it. A house that, by her own design, was intended to last 1,000 years. "She gave me the perfect hiding place." Did you know she was designing the pillars to be hollow, or did she tell you they were conduits for ventilation? Brooks pressed. "She knew," Pierce insisted, running a frustrated hand through his hair. "She was the only person I could trust with the secret of the hollow pillars and the strength to bear the weight." The weight of that silver, Brooks, was specifically designed to ensure the entire foundation settled perfectly. It was her final, perfect, structural detail. Brooks pulled out Lucy's official, public blueprint and pointed to the private studies wing. "These pillars, Mr. Pierce, were submitted to the city as non-load-bearing decorative supports for the second-floor ballroom. The weight of the silver you stored inside them, that's equivalent to half a ton of books and granite being placed on a support meant for a lightweight decorative arch. She lied to the city, concealing the weight. She lied to you, claiming the weight was merely a structural benefit. She designed a house that was sound enough to take the weight of your crime, but the house itself never needed that counterweight for stability. Your secret was merely secured by her brilliance, not structurally necessary. Lucy had lied to everyone. She had lied to the city, concealing the weight capacity on the blueprints for the pillars that were publicly designated as mere support for an elegant ballroom. She had lied to Pierce, telling him the weight was stabilizing the foundation. And she had lied to Amos, telling him the pillars were part of a drainage system. Her real blueprint, the one she had only revealed to herself, was the one that made the house structurally sound, regardless of what was placed in the pillars, but she had exploited the secrecy of the pillars to ensure the land grant and the money were secured until her own death. She gave you the key, Brooks said softly. Why? Why expose her own work, her own client, at the very end? Pierce's composure returned, colder than ever. Because Lucy Davenport was not just an architect, Brooks. She was a moralist. She realized, in her last days, that she had built an immortal vault for a crime, and she couldn't stand the truth of it. Her conscience, not her structural integrity, failed her. Pierce stared at the towering, silent house, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and awe. She built the house to last forever, and then gave you the tools to destroy its purpose. It's the most beautiful betrayal I've ever known. With the evidence in Brooks's hands, Pierce's reign was over. The land grant was returned to federal custody, and the silver, the stolen fortune, was seized. Cedarcroft, the magnificent, silent, perfectly balanced house, stood as a monument to its architect's genius and its patron's undoing. The news of Gideon Pierce's arrest for conspiracy and theft of land was the biggest scandal the young state had ever seen. The land grant of 1778 was now public, throwing the property rights of the entire region into chaos. And at the center of it all was Lucy Davenport's magnificent, illegal, and perfectly stable house, Cedarcroft. Lucy was gone. She had died quietly in her sleep a few days after giving Brooks the key and her confession. She had not waited for the result of the investigation, her task completed. Amos Fletcher returned only after Pierce was in custody, emerging from the salt marshes, haggard and worn, but the tension book and the remaining brass bolts still in his possession. He went straight to the now-silent worksite. He was met by Nathaniel Brooks, who had spent days reading Lucy's confession and the complex structural notes attached to the land grant. Fletcher, Brooks said, offering the young man a hand. The house stands. Your sequence worked. Davenport's confession ensured your freedom. She saved the house, Amos replied, his voice hoarse. That was her only concern. Brooks then presented Amos with a final, sealed envelope, found tucked into the lining of Lucy's Bible. It was her final will and testament, handwritten in her sharp, elegant script. Amos opened it with trembling hands. The will was brief. She left her entire, small estate of books, surveying equipment, and notes, everything except the final blueprints, to Amos Fletcher. She designated him as the chief architect of Cedarcroft, charged with its maintenance for the rest of his life. The final paragraph was addressed directly to him. My dearest Amos, you are the true master of the house's rhythm. The tension book is your authority. The house will move, it will groan, and it will settle, but it will not break. If you ever feel that the initial sequence is failing, or that a hurricane has put too much strain on the attic truss, the box contains the final 8 bolts. They are your second chance. Use them sparingly, and only with the most profound caution. The brass bolts are not merely fasteners, they are its heartstrings. Cedarcroft is your legacy now. Protect its silence. LD. Amos looked down at the mention of the final 8 bolts, the ones she hadn't needed to use, still gleaming in the box he had hidden. He realized she had calculated not only the initial stress, but also the potential future stresses. Her genius had factored in decades of decay and storm damage. She had built into the structure its own means of survival and self-correction. The final blueprints, Brooks said gently. We searched everywhere. They don't exist, do they? Not on paper, anyway. Amos looked up, then around the grand, perfect, silent house. He ran a hand over the cool, hard stone of the wall. "They do, sir," Amos said quietly, a tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "They are not on paper. They are built into the very bones of this house. Every beam, every stone, every angle. Cedarcroft is the final blueprint." Amos Fletcher, the apprentice, stood alone in the perfect gallery, now the keeper of the most complex, defiant, and beautiful house in the young republic. A monument to a brilliant woman who had died to save her masterpiece and correct a terrible injustice. Years passed. The scandal of Gideon Pierce faded into the history books, and the land grant of 1778, after years of legal wrangling, was finally recognized. The land around Cedarcroft was eventually turned into a public reserve, a space of quiet reflection and natural beauty. Cedarcroft itself stood abandoned by any owner, claimed by the state, but maintained by its self-appointed guardian, Amos Fletcher. The state, unwilling to sell a property so tainted by scandal, and yet unable to justify tearing down a structure that was hailed as a quiet, revolutionary masterpiece, simply let it exist. Amos never left. He lived in the service cottage, dedicating his life to Lucy's final instructions. He was an aging man now, his hair gray, his back slightly bowed, but his hands were still strong and his eyes held the same quiet focus. Every year, after the worst of the hurricane season had passed, Amos would climb the rickety scaffolding he had built into the inner wall of the attic. He would take the tension book and his wrench, and he would climb to the oak truss, the silent, beating heart of the house. He would spend hours listening to the wood, measuring the infinitesimal shift of the roofline, feeling the rhythm of the constant, dynamic equilibrium Lucy had built into the structure. The house had settled, it had grown, but it had never failed. It simply breathed. One autumn evening, Amos was up in the attic, the sunset casting a warm, ruby glow through the high, circular window. He finished his annual inspection, finding the tension perfect, the oak humming its low, steady song. He packed his tools, tucked the book into his belt, and paused by the small, attic window. He looked down at the bluff, at the river flowing to the sea, and then at the massive, silent house he had protected for 40 years. It was magnificent. It was perfect, and it was all that remained of the woman he had loved and served. He ran a weary hand over the cool, dry wood of the oak truss. He noticed a small, almost invisible inscription that Lucy must have carved before the truss was lifted into place. It was a single line of Latin, worn smooth by the years, not to be broken, but to be bent. Amos smiled. He knew then that Cedarcroft was not a house built for permanence, but for defiance. Lucy had designed it to challenge the law of nature and man, and in its enduring silence, it won. He finally turned away from the window, closing the door on the perfect silence of the attic. He descended the 3 flights of stairs, his steps slow but certain. His work was finished for the year. He had kept the promise. When he reached the bottom floor, he walked through the grand gallery, where the light flowed in through the massive, perfectly proportioned windows. He stopped in the center of the hall, listened to the utter silence of the great house, and then simply sat down on the polished stone floor, resting his tired eyes. He had earned his rest. The house, the perfect, silent machine, stood watching over the coast, its secret safe within its very walls, its genius finally, and absolutely, proven. And so, Cedarcroft stands. A monument to a brilliant mind who used her final blueprint to expose a crime and achieve a kind of immortality not in stone, but in the enduring silence of a perfectly balanced structure. Lucy Davenport gave the world a house that lives, breathes, and defies the laws of nature and man, and in doing so, secured a lasting legacy that no one, not the jealous rival, nor the corrupt patron, could ever destroy. The house is a riddle, a triumph, and a ghost. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest structures are not the ones we see, but the complex, invisible truths hidden within. What do you think motivated Lucy more in the end? Her genius as an architect, or her conscience as a person? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more historical tales, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story from the pages of the past.